Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Today, I have with me the eldest son of former President Ronald Reagan, Michael Reagan. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here, getting older.
Hey, it's always good to be getting older, right? That's what people don't realize. It is good to be getting older. But you have had quite a special life with your dad being the president of the United States. And I think he started running for office when you were 20, right?
Gosh, I was 20 years old, but remember, I had a mother.
That's
People
right.
forget I had a mom. You know,
Yes.
it's really interesting. Up until my dad gave the speech, A Time for Choosing, back in 1964, I was Jane Wyman's son. And then my dad gave the speech, A Time for Choosing, and literally overnight, I became Ronald Reagan's son.
That's so
And I'm
funny
going
because I want to talk about both worlds, because today people oftentimes call Washington, D.C. the Hollywood for ugly people because people have become like really obsessed with themselves. But you got to see I think you probably saw a different side of Hollywood than we know today, right?
Oh yeah, a much different side of Hollywood, than you see today. Not that it didn't have activists, didn't have, the liberals in there and communism in there, what have you, which my dad fought back basically in the 1940s and 1950s. A lot of actors don't realize that it was my dad who gave them health care insurance. It was my dad who gave them residuals. They didn't have residuals up until that point in time. And to show you who Ronald Reagan was, I go, are you crazy, Dad? When he wrote the bill and signed it to give residuals to actors, he wrote himself out of it because he didn't want people to think that he only passed this bill through SAG so that when his career was over, he would have a way to make a living. So he didn't get residuals. And
But
you're
that's
going
why
like,
people love
wow.
him, because he was about the people.
Oh, yeah. He truly was. And it was never about him. It was about people around him and what have you. And whether you were a friend of his or you're a family member, he really treated people pretty well equally. He told stories. And as a good friend of mine, Judge Bill Clark, said years ago, and a great friend of my father's, said, your father spoke to us in parables.
Mm.
And you really think about it, you go back and listen to his speeches. He did. He spoke to us in parables. He told us a story. And then he prayed to God afterwards, you got it.
Was it like that growing up? Was he like that as a father too?
Always a lesson. If he took me to the ranch, which he took me every Saturday morning, go out to the ranch and shoot ground squirrels in the afternoon, the lesson wasn't shooting straight. The lesson was to wait for these little damn things to pop their heads out of the ground. And if you didn't get the shot the first time, you had to sit and wait and wait
Patience.
and wait until it would pop up again. So the lesson there was patience. And that's just what he did, with members of the family. And you look back at that point, I went like, Dad, just let me shoot the damn squirrel. But then later on, you look back and say, oh, he was teaching me a lesson.
And I think that's kind of how, I would say even today, Democrats are starting to talk about him that way, which I find fascinating, because I think the first time Trump ran in 2016, I didn't get that strong love of your father from the Democrats. But now this time, even Alyssa Slotkin is saying, well, he's not Ronald Reagan. And I'm like, what? Do you now love Ronald Reagan?
Well, yeah, interesting enough, I said on so many occasions, I might have written about the fact they loved Ronald Reagan the day we buried him. Up until that point in time, he was at war with the media and what have you. And some of them, Sam and others, came to be believers in Ronald Reagan. But again, it was always a battle. And people talk about what's going on today. Well, back in my day, the time of my dad, it was ABC, NBC, and CBS. But they were all talking about him. They're all negative. They're all saying he was a racist. They're all saying he was going to stop Social Security. They're all saying he was going to start a war. They were saying the same things back then on 3 channels, where today they're saying it on every channel, if you will, and there's so many.
And there's so many other ways for people to say it. All the social media, and everybody thinks they're a journalist, and everybody's going out and they're all attacking. And it's very tough. But you said something at the beginning that you were Jane Wyman's son before you were Ronald Reagan's son. And I think that's, if you've watched the movie, and I'm sure you watched the movie of your father's life at the beginning, So it's fascinating from my perspective, because as a viewer, I'm watching that and I'm like, man, he was in a situation where his wife was really famous and she was a really great actress and he was an okay actor. He wasn't the one in the spotlight. But there has to be a security in that lifestyle, and there has to be kind of like an allure to that lifestyle. For him to step out and run for governor would have been challenging, but also he had the name ID. So tell us a little bit about what that was like from the perspective of family.
And remember, he was the first president elected who'd been divorced. No president before had been divorced. So that was a real big issue, during the campaign. But it was interesting after we saw the movie at the Grauman's here in Hollywood. And I've known Mark and everybody for 20 years. I've been telling them stories for 20 years. And a lot of those stories showed up in the movie. But they came up to me afterwards and said, did we treat your mother okay? Was that all right? I said, let me tell you something. I said, my dad gave a speech during the 1980s. And I called my mom on the phone. I said, Mom, did you see Dad's speech tonight? She said, no. I said, you didn't? Why? She said, I didn't like it in the 1930s. Why would I like it today? And I said, you got her absolutely 100% correct. She didn't like politics. She didn't like it at all. And she didn't like being dragged into these things. But yet, she voted for him twice. She didn't say a word. What was great about my mom, and which doesn't happen anymore. My mom was offered, I can't tell you how many books to write during my father's presidential life about Ronald Reagan, negative books, offered a lot of money. Her contract she had with Falcon Crest simply said, I will not answer any questions about my former husband. If that question is asked, I will simply get up from the table or chair and walk away. I'm not going to do that. And she never said a word about my father, her former husband, until the day we buried my dad at the library. And then she said some wonderful, I get choked up, wonderful words about my dad. And that's the kind of woman she was. And that doesn't exist anymore in Hollywood. And that's really sad. Such leadership she showed and what you could be like. And it's not like that at all. She was terrific. I am the way I am because of my mom. I am the way I am politically because of my father. Because I never knew my mother's politics. I never asked her who she voted for. Never talked politics with my mom at all, except for that one phone call. What did you think of Dad's speech? Didn't like it in 1930s or 40s? Why would I like it today?
But it is really hard on family members. And I think that's the ugly side that people don't get to see, that your life is on display, whether you want it to be or not. If you are the spouse, if you are the ex, no matter what, they're going after you. They're trying to get information on you and they're trying to break your family apart. And I can't imagine what it was like, because you mentioned he's the first person to be elected president who was divorced and had young kids. So at that time, you have these forces in these three major media corporations that are just trying to destroy you, because that's really what it is. It's not news. They're trying to destroy you.
I couldn't find a job after my dad became president of the United States. Nobody wanted to hire me. They thought I was going to be the next Billy Carter. And the media was after me. The DA in LA pulled 2 or 3 search warrants on my house looking for information to use against my father in the 1980 campaign. People ask me, why didn't you ever run? I said, ask my wife. Standing at the front door, watching the LAPD come in and or DA come in and do search warrants on her house, her privacy. That's like great in many cases when they walk into the house like that and tear everything apart. And I said, I'll go out and speak and write articles, but I'm not going to run and allow my family to go through what we went through then at that point. So I always create jobs for myself because nobody would hire me. And that's how I got back into boat racing, doing fundraising for different charitable causes, setting 5 world records in the 1980s with a powerboat, raising $1.5 million, $2 million for cystic fibrosis, the Olympic Committee, and all of those things. But they're all fundraising events because I said, if I'm going to get into something, I need to do something to raise money for different charities so the media cannot attack me for being Ronald Reagan.
You're so right, because after I ran for governor here in the state of Michigan, when I came out, I had one of the people that supported me say, I want you to come and interview for a job at my company. And the CEO of the company looked at me and he said, I can't hire you as an out Republican. Like, you can't be hired. And that was right after the race. And I thought, this could be really bad. And then another guy said to me, he was like, once you've run for office, you're like toxic. You can't. And that for you never ran. It was your dad that, because, and that's the destructive force that I don't think people realize. And that's the kind of behind the scenes that I wanted people to understand, is that when you do this and you offer yourself up to serve, you are taking your entire family with you. And you talk about it as being just as ugly back then as it is now. And I think people oftentimes go, gosh, it's so bad now. You see what happened to Governor Shapiro, which was horrible. You see the violence. And I think that maybe on the level of exposure of the things that are happening, but your father, they attempted to assassinate him. They went after him. I mean, politics is an ugly game.
It is an ugly game, and it's affected by children, Cameron and Ashley. Ashley's lost jobs. She's a teacher now. She runs a school. She's a principal, but getting a principal job, she actually signed a contract to be principal for one school, and within 48 hours, it was rescinded because they found out Ronald Reagan was her grandfather.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding me.
No, same things happened to my son trying to get jobs because Ronald Reagan is his grandfather. I mean, people don't see that side of it and the damage it does. So, we've been there to kind of help our kids, and they're doing great. But again, this is what they face in life too. It really trickles down all the way down, and it's the anger and the mad. I mean, go see the movie Reagan. One of the seminal parts of the movie is my dad is shot. He's in the hospital. He wakes up in the hospital, and who's in the hospital room with him? Tip O'Neill with his rosary in his hand, praying for my father. And the two of them pray together for the healing of my father. Now, ask yourself, would that happen today? Would that happen today? And I think not. I think not. It would not happen today.
And I think that's the sad thing about it. I mean, even this past week, you see Gretchen Whitmer go into the Oval Office, and obviously she did some silly things, putting the... Yes. I'm
not on your show. Okay.
Right. I said, I think there are two groups of people that haven't figured out how peekaboo works. And that's the toddlers and Governor Whitmer. So doesn't realize that when you put the folder up, we can still see you. But to be fair, she was going there to meet with the president. And that alone was enough for the Democrats to just eviscerate her. I mean, the people that came out, especially on the state level, that went after her. How could you negotiate with him? How could you? I mean, he's the president. What does it come to if you don't have people that are willing to sit down together?
And you can't sit down together. They don't allow it. And look at Bill Maher. Bill Maher goes and has dinner with the president of the United States. You can say what you want to say about it, what Bill Maher did and the president did and what have you. The president's very gracious, but he's being attacked from where? He's being attacked from the left for daring to do that. And so how do you get together and solve any issues when you've got those kinds of things going on? And I will tell you, I mean, you look at Trump, you say what you want to say about Trump, but he is wide open. I mean,
yes.
He is so wide open. If you don't know who Donald Trump is by now, where have you been? If you're going to say something about Donald Trump, you don't think there's going to be a return salvo at that point in time? No, I mean, he is very open. Press conferences, bringing people into the Oval Office. And Whitmer, invited into the Oval Office where he signed an executive order. Has he ever signed executive order by himself in the middle of the night? There's always meeting in the Oval Office when he does that. So what does she think? Is she not paying attention to the President of the United States? She paid attention enough to say, geez, I'd love to work with you. I appreciate you. I love your tariffs going to help me here in Michigan with the building of cars and all these other things. That's great, but I don't want anybody to know me.
Well, and I can't remember a time when she was invited by Biden. And that to me is even more bizarre. Here's a woman who was literally promised the vice presidency and then it was rescinded. It went to Kamala Harris after the fact. I mean, her staff, we had heard, was actually in DC looking for homes because they were planning on moving to be the vice president. And then she doesn't, I mean, she's never talked about going to the White House that I can remember with Joe Biden as president. But she goes with Donald Trump. And I think you brought up Bill Maher going there. And I think one of the things that was very critical that he said was, all of the things that I didn't like about him were absent when I actually met him. Well, isn't that interesting how that works? When you've heard terrible things and then you actually meet the person, that's called finding out who they really are.
It really is. And the fact that Trump has a way to laugh at himself. And in fact, Bill Maher brings a whole list of, these are the things you've said about me, and Trump signs it, gives it back to him. Now he's got a signature on it. So Trump gets it. I mean, and it's like, doesn't anybody else get it? I mean, the reason he's doing well, he's having fun. He's having fun. And nobody else is having fun. They're angry. And you're going, why are you angry? I mean, you look at Coachella Valley this last weekend. Coachella Valley, Bernie going down there. I mean, talk about ruining a great weekend for people at Coachella who never draw a sober breath anyway at Coachella. You know, at that point in time, I mean, you could have put anybody on stage saying, yeah, I love it, you were great. I mean, $17 lemonade, which I'm sure was spiked, and there's a little bit of weed floating around down there in Coachella. I mean, you know, so again, it's, why are you angry? Why are you upset? And who caused you to be upset? You lied for 4 years. You lied about the President of the United States and his cognitive ability. You lied about it to the public, and you got found out.
Stay tuned for more with Michael Reagan, but first, let me tell you about my partners at IFCJ. Israel is still under attack. Missile fire has resumed from Israel's enemies, terrorists who seek the utter death and destruction of Israel. Here in America, we can't imagine what it's like to live in constant fear like this. But for the people of Israel, it's very real, and it's very real every single day. Please join me and show people of Israel you'll help protect them in this time of attack and uncertainty. And one of the best ways to do this is by giving to the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Your gift today helps provide security essentials like bomb shelters, flak jackets, and bulletproof vests, armored security vehicles, ambulances, and so much more. There's no better time to give than right now during the Passover holiday when we celebrate Israel's historic deliverance and birth as a nation. Give a special Passover gift today and help protect the people of Israel. Call 888-488-IFCJ. That's 888-488-4325, or go online at supportifcj.org. It's one word. It's supportifcj.org. Bernie had it taken away from him. I mean, why does he continue to speak for these people? It's never a fair election on their side, and they can never say that it wasn't a fair election on our side because there are plenty of establishment Republicans who Trump would not have been their first choice, but the people chose, and the people chose Donald Trump, and he is president now. Well, let me ask you this. A lot of people do compare your father and Donald Trump. What do you think your father would think of Donald Trump?
I think my dad, you know, when I said Donald Trump in 2015, he called me on the phone. I'm running for president of the United States. What do you think? I said, I think you'll destroy the Republican Party. You have another question? and so we talked for a moment. He said, well, I didn't know your father, but I liked your father. Because I liked your father, I like you. I said, well, I appreciate it. I didn't know your father either, but I liked your father because I liked your father, I like you. And he said, will you ever come to the White House? We have a Reagan Day. I said, absolutely, and I'll return it. You come up to the ranch, and we'll have a Trump Day up there. But what I didn't realize then, I wrote an op-ed piece about this not long after the election. I said, I didn't realize he had to break the party, to rebuild the party, to win again, because it was not in a winning mode. And so I pat him on the back. And so I was right in 2015. But I was right when I wrote the op-ed piece and said, I didn't realize he had to break the party to rebuild the party to, in fact, win again like he won in November. So, you know, I mean, there's always going to be some similarities between them, if you will. But the one thing is they both knew what they wanted. They both, you know, and I wrote an op-ed piece this last week. You know, China is his Russia. My dad's Russia. I mean, that's how I look at it. He's dealing with China and Xi. Dad had to deal with Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, and all the leaders before him. So similarities there, how they're handling it. They're being tough. They're being strong. What happened in the Oval Office with the president of Ukraine? I said, that was another Ronald Reagan moment, because Ronald Reagan did the same thing in Reykjavik with Mikhail Gorbachev. When Mikhail Gorbachev said, hey, you have to give up SDI or Star Wars, and my dad said, "Nyet," and walked away. In fact, my dad told me in 1976 when he lost, I said, why do you want to even run for president? He said, for so long I've watched American presidents sit down with secretary generals of the Soviet Union. And Michael, every time we sit down, they always ask us to give up something to get along with them. I wanted to be the first president to sit down with secretary general of the Soviet Union. And while he was telling me what it was I was going to have to give up, I was going to get up from my side of the table, lean over and whisper in his ear, "Nyet." I told Mark that story in 20 years ago when he was getting ready for the movie. And that's what shows up in the movie in Reykjavik, because that's what he said when my dad walked away in Reykjavik. He did the same thing in Reykjavik that Donald Trump did in the Oval Office. No difference. So there is similarities to what they in fact do. They do it differently. Donald Trump does it as a New York businessman in your face. I mean, there's not a New York businessman that isn't like Donald Trump. There isn't a New Jersey businessman that isn't like Donald Trump. There isn't a Chicago businessman not like Donald Trump. Ronald Reagan from Hollywood in the Midwest. Donald Trump fighting the people he had to fight in New York to get things done, to build buildings. That's how he is and had to be successful.
That scene in the movie was so powerful. I remember sitting in the theater, and I think you really have to see that in the theater too, because it's just such a powerful, having the big screen up there and watching this all unfold on the big screen. That scene was so powerful. I remember thinking to myself, what is it in him that makes him negotiate in such a strong manner? Because here's a guy who had a really tough childhood, a father that had all kinds of issues. He comes from Hollywood, not the guy that America looks at and goes, okay, this film star is going to be a great negotiator on the world stage, but God has different plans for everybody. What is it in him? Like when you were growing up, what was it that you went, man, this guy's going to be great?
Yeah, I always thought he was great as my dad, and I learned about America sitting in the right front seat of a station wagon on a Saturday morning riding out to the ranch, regaling me with songs of the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, telling me about the greatness of America. I learned that 8 years old, 7 years old, sitting in the right front seat of a car. And I always thought he was great. I mean, Maureen probably looked at him more as president. To be honest with you, when he ran for governor, I was just 28. My first vote was for him, in 1966 to be governor.
Oh, yeah, because you would have been just turning that age.
And to be honest with you, people are asking me, I take people on tours to the library all the time, and they always ask me, what were you thinking back then when you ran for governor? I said, I was 21 years old. I was thinking of my next date.
Yeah,
that's
right.
what I was thinking. I was thinking, I hope he wins. Boy, that's going to be really nice. But and like when he got sworn in at midnight, in 1967 at midnight, they called me. I was in up at Lake Tahoe skiing with friends of mine. I said, you think I'm going to come down from Lake Tahoe for 2 minutes? Are you crazy? I'm up here. I'm having a great time. So I had to really learn this stuff and what have you. I used to ask Maureen, tell me about the difference between Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative. I said, hello, I'm just out here talking to Republican women. I don't know what to say and what have you. But Maureen's the one who really pushed my dad into becoming a Democrat. And you go back and you could Google this. My dad becomes a Democrat within 48 hours of General Electric Theater being canceled, and he's off the air. Why did that happen? Bobby Kennedy called the head of General Electric and said, you've got contracts coming up, and you'd be better served to find a way to get rid of that guy speaking about my brother, the president, and get him off of television to get those contracts done. And so guess what? 48 hours later, Democrat Ronald Reagan is fired. The show is canceled, and he's without a job. But you know something else? He has more time on his hands now. He writes a brand new speech called The Time for Choosing, which he gives for Barry Goldwater, launches a political career into governorship and president. But 48 hours after going off the air, my sister browbeat him enough. He changed his registration from Democrat to Republican. So people always say to me, was it Nancy that changed him to a Republican and got him to run for office? I said, no, it was Bobby Kennedy did that when he got him fired from General Electric Theater and got it canceled.
What would you think of Bobby Kennedy Jr. today?
That'd be interesting. But again, my dad was my dad's the one who gave, I think, one of the first talks. John F. Children came to him and said, will you help us raise money for the library? They said, all the other libraries have like living presidents and what have you. We don't. And so my dad gave a phenomenal speech. I think he gave it at Ted Kennedy's townhome in Virginia to raise money for the Kennedy Center or the library. And he did that. And it's one of the best speeches you'll ever hear from my dad. He understood the battle, but he understood when the battle was over, you get on with it. You shake hands, as he did with Tip O'Neill, which shows in the movie with Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill and him disagreed on everything known to mankind politically, but they found a way to get things done when they had to.
I think that's been the confusion after seeing Nancy Pelosi stand up and tear up the speech in the middle of the State of the Union. All of this negativity. You've got Bernie Sanders like you said, at Coachella, standing up and giving speeches. And this just feels like politics is trying to take over every part of life. And really, I mean, I see kids in middle school talking about politics. I never thought about it. You talk about your own dad running when you were 20, and it wasn't your first thought, because when we were young, that isn't how it was. It wasn't every thing you turned on. It wasn't just in your face all the time. But this generation of young people, they have politics in their face constantly, and it's not a joyful situation. It's not. No, politics is not joy. Entertainment is joy.
Yeah, and where's the entertainment?
No, right.
You have to ask yourself, where is the entertainment at this point in time? My family, my son took his kids out. He's got 3 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old to see King of Kings the other day to get entertainment and get a story and what have you. But the aggregates, even our family, like Patty used to send me her op-ed pieces. And when I saw one that I could put up on my Twitter or X account and not make the world go crazy, I put it up and she would thank me. And then a year ago, she sent me one I thought was really good. I put it up. And I let her know I just put it up on X. And you got to take it down. You got to take it down. I can't have one of my op-ed pieces on X. It's owned by Elon Musk. You can't do that. I said, well, I'm not taking it down. You're going like, why are you so upset? Why? They can't even have a conversation. It's just they're mad and they're angry and they don't calm down. And that's what's really sad about this whole thing. But my dad, and I've said this so many times, my dad had 4 children, 2 from Jane. I was adopted in the family, best decision they ever made. And I met the other kids. Best decision they ever made. But I was adopted into the family. So you have Maureen and I with Jane, and you have Patty and Ron with Nancy. And, Maureen and I are more conservative, and Patty and Ron are not. But you know something? Thanksgiving dinner, we were all at the same table. We were all at the same table. Even though he had 2 children, Patty led a march on Washington when he was president, brought the people in who co-marched with her. He invited them into the Oval Office. She wrote books about her mother, the hatred for her mom and all that stuff. But you know something? He still had them at Thanksgiving dinner. They were still there. And that's the difference between people talk about my father. Then if you're going to talk about my father, really look at my father, the deep in my father's soul and who he was. He didn't he didn't cancel people because he disagreed with them. He invited them in. That's how he's able to ultimately make a decision with Mikhail Gorbachev or get together with all these people who were against him for so many years, and his own children who love him to death. But the fact is, he didn't get angry because they came out against him. He embraced them. And if we're going to solve the problems in America, we have to learn to embrace each other. You want to follow Ronald Reagan's rules? Those are Ronald Reagan's rules.
Stick around. We've got more coming up with Michael Reagan after this. But first, I want to talk to you about my newest partners at Ease Total Health. Do you remember when President Trump said Obamacare sucks? Well, President Trump also said, I don't want to terminate Obamacare. I want to replace it with much better health care. We can all agree with President Trump that Obamacare has been horrible. Obamacare is a total disaster with its overpriced premiums and sky-high deductibles. But today is a new day, and now you can replace your overpriced, lousy Obamacare with Ease for Everyone, the only group plan that any adult in the United States is now eligible to join. Listen as we compare Ease for Everyone to Obamacare. With Ease, you get a monthly cost as low as $262. You get free unlimited prescriptions. 93% of all drugs covered are available at no extra cost, including insulin, with huge savings on brand names. Free unlimited virtual primary care, unlimited urgent care for a $30 copay, generous cashback reimbursements for emergency room visits and ambulance transportation. Doctor visits, you can have affordable healthcare for as low as $262 a month today. Visit easeforeveryone.com/tutor and join today. That's easeforeveryone.com/tutor. Now stay tuned. We've got more after this. I think that's been the most shocking reaction from legislators in Michigan to Gretchen Whitmer being in the Oval Office. It's like, ban her. She broke the rule. She wasn't allowed to do that. How could she go against us like this? And how do you expect to get anywhere if you can't sit down together? And like I said, I am not the person to come out and defend Gretchen Whitmer, but the reaction to it has been shocking, that there is this divide. There is a wall you do not cross, a line you cannot stick your toe across, or else that party will just eat you alive. And it's unreasonable.
It is. It's absolutely unreasonable. And that you can't find, can't find common ground or anything. They don't want to find common ground. There is no common ground.
Right.
As long as you are a Trump supporter, there is no common ground. We don't want him to succeed. We do not want him to succeed. We want him to fail, because we're going to do what? What's your message? We want him to fail so we can. And they never have the we can answer.
Right. That's what they've been looking for now for a while. Well, before I let you go, we've talked a lot about your dad, but I want to ask, what would your mom think of Hollywood today?
She really would turn away from what Hollywood's done. She was such a gracious, wonderful woman, and she'd be appalled by it. They had issues back in the day. But she never played those games. She did her work, and she did it well. They referred to her as one-take Wyman, which is really tough if you're working with her on set. Don't come in for a second take, and God forbid a third take, because she took that very seriously. Here's a woman who was left on a doorstep of a neighbor, went through foster care basically, had a tough childhood growing up, and put it all together. And Maury and I, we were lucky to have her. We're the only two people ever raised in a family, born into a family where the father would go on to become president and the mother would go on to become an Academy Award-winning actress. And the night that I went to the Grauman's and we saw the movie Reagan, I walked out with Dennis and others out front, because my mom's handprints and footprints are there at Grauman's Chinese in the ground, and we looked at that. So it was a great memory for my mom. I'm lucky to be where I'm at. I've done a lot of things myself in my life, but I'm about ready to celebrate my 50th anniversary with my wife in November. And we're going to get remarried at the same church that my mom and dad got married in back in the 40s. And I have two great kids, Cameron and Ashley. Ashley's about ready to give birth to her child, first child, and Cameron's got three of his own. So I'm blessed with my family. I married a Midwestern farm girl who keeps me grounded.
Those Midwestern girls, they're good.
And my mother loved her. My mother thought she was great.
That's so awesome. That is such a great story. And your mom, what a glamorous woman. I was looking at pictures of her today. Really so beautiful. And I'm sure that idea of Hollywood and glamour and taking you someplace that you would never could have imagined was so real for her. And to see how that has changed and taking away the glamour, it's unfortunate. She was a beautiful woman.
It is sad that glamour's been taken away, and I don't know when it comes back. But we need to get it back everywhere. We need to do the rosary sitting in a chair praying for Ronald Reagan moment, which we don't have today.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I love movies, and my mom is such a movie nut. When I was a kid, we went to the movies every weekend and sometimes twice a weekend. And there were always new movies coming out. And it was always just like that way you went into the theater, you just got taken to another place. And I remember every time it was the Academy Awards, we sat as a family, we watched and we listened to every speech. And they were all these speeches about loving your family and how they were so positive. It was all opportunity. And that's what I think going back to a space where you just hear positive lessons, you hear positive messages. That's what this country wants. It wants that.
It wants that. We're getting it with one candidate in the last election. One candidate was in fact giving us that.
That's true.
It's my dad, both he and the president now, both shot by would-be assassin. What did they do? They came back stronger. What did my dad do? My dad forgave John Hinckley before he went back to the White House. Pope John Paul gets shot a couple of months later. He forgives his would-be assassin before he goes back to resume his Pope duties. And the two of them ultimately get together not long after that and form a phenomenal bond that brings peace to Poland, wraps it around, and ends up bringing down the Berlin Wall.
I mean, it has been such a joy to talk to you and hear all these stories about your father. He did so much for everyone in this country and people around the world. He honestly deserves all of the love and all of the praise that he gets. And I'm so glad that you were willing to share so much with us, and even the side of how challenging it is for the family once someone runs. I think that's something that people don't hear very often, the side where it affects generations to come, and even your children have been affected by it. But I'm just so grateful you came on today. Michael Reagan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us next time. Have a blessed day.